The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
Welcome to the Benjamin Dixon Show. I am your host, Benjamin Dixon. Today is Tuesday, May 12th. 2020. Thanks so much for joining me. I have a jam-packed show, and it is quite the dichotomy of a show that I have for you today. So first, I want to give you a syllabus so you know what you're in store for. There's a serious conversation that we have to have about conservatives and Ahmaud Arbery and the conversation that they are having about whether or not it was okay to shoot this black man because he was on a construction site. Somebody saw him go into a construction site. It's a very serious conversation because it deals with life and death issues as it pertains to the rest of us black men. Now, I also want to talk about what happened in North Carolina this weekend. Basically a lynch mob went and showed up to the home of a young teenage black man, young boy, 18-year-old, and attempted to take him out of his home because they thought he was somebody he wasn't. And even if he was that somebody, what gives them the right to do that? So there's some very serious conversations that we have on top of all the regular politics that are going on, the coronavirus, the outbreak that's happening at the White House. There's a lot of serious stuff that we have to talk about. But I want to start off with an interview that I did with David Ferris about his book, The Kids Are All Left. The reason I want to start there is because, well, I don't want to scare everyone away because the conversation that we got to have is going to be pretty hard hitting. And I want to make sure that you get this book and at least hear about this book because it is really important for us to make this shift to the left for many reasons, economic reasons, social reasons. But the most pertinent to me this morning is the fact that the people were having conversations, millions of people on Twitter right now having a conversation about the destinies and the life and death decision-making about black men, right? The people who think they are the arbiters of black men's lives, they're overwhelmingly conservative white men. And so this book is also pertinent because the further we move to the left, the more we shed this historical bigotry that is rooted in capitalism, rooted in American white supremacy, that is preserved right now by conservatives, overwhelmingly conservatives, and some remnants inside of the Democratic Party. But I digress. I'm going to play a little bit of music so I can reset myself, reset the tone, because you could already tell I'm 38 hot already. But we're going to play some music, and then I'm going to go directly to the interview with Professor David Ferris because the book is important. And then immediately after the patron party, we're going to dig our heels into this conversation that they think that they are that they think that they are authorized to have without our response. Joining me now is Professor David Ferris. He is a friend of the show. He's been on before. Last time he was here, we spoke about his book, It's Time to Fight Dirty. And this time we're going to discuss his book, The Kids Are Left. David, thank you so much for joining me.
Ben, thanks for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to be here. It's
always a pleasure to have you on. Your last book really resonated with me because of how serious I believe the times are. We really just, I think the writing is on the wall even more so now that we don't have time for politics as usual, and we need leadership that will essentially fight dirty. And we went through several of your chapters, and I hope our readers got a chance to get that book. But I've also had a chance to read your upcoming book, your forthcoming book, The Kids Are Left. And I'm telling you, I think you're the pulse. You have your finger on the pulse of the country. Tell us a little bit about the book, and then we'll dig into it.
Sure. Yeah. So the Kids Are All Left comes from just some thinking about trends that we've been seeing in the youth vote, kind of like this century, and this century spans most of my adult voting life,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that most people probably intuitively know that young people lean very heavily Democratic right now. But this is actually a trend that goes back to like 2002 and 2004.
Yeah.
And so those voters that voted against Bush, those 18 to 29 voters that voted against Bush in 2004 are like my age now. They're in their 40s. So that has created a kind of a large swath of Democratic leaning voters that are moving through the electorate and are starting to vote at higher rates. And so what I wanted to do was to think about sort of some of the ways that people dismiss this trend. Like that young people always get more conservative as they age, or they don't vote enough, this and that. And just kind of puncture those myths a little bit and try to also explain why, like why are young people voting for Democrats? It's not like Democrats are all that great, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But it's a real trend. It's sort of unmistakable in the data, and I wanted sort of my job to be, to assure people that this is a real thing that's going to persist well into the future, unless Republicans really make a sharp change in the way that they approach public policy issues, and the way they approach cultural issues, and particularly the way they approach issues around racial and gender justice and climate change. Those are three big things driving the youth vote towards Democrats right now. So yeah, I just kind of wanted, I think when you say this to the average person, like young people are left, they're like, well, they were always left. They'll turn into conservatives when they're old. And I'm like, actually, that's not true on any measure.
I thought that was going to be the case for me. I remember when I started my master's program in my 20s, I was like, I was going to say I was far more radical than I am now. But life comes full circle in a different direction in this era because of the type of leadership that we have had, the type of leadership that we currently have. And it really has called for me to be far more radical now than I even was going into my master's program, right? I talked myself into tamping down on my radicalism so that I can get this academic education on political science. But the more I studied it, and then the more I saw things play out in real life, I became far more radical. So it didn't happen to me, and I don't think it's happening to a lot of people in our age group. And I know for certain, like, this next generation, the Zoomers, the Generation Z, like, they're so far radical, like they probably look at us and be like, oh, we're just milquetoast liberals, when in fact we're probably way further to the left than the Democratic Party. And that was something interesting in the book that I found. I found that you really focused on the Republican Party, but there was like this subtext throughout the entire book that really the kids are much further left than even the Democratic Party right now.
Oh, much further left. Yeah. I mean, and this, I didn't get into this too much in the book because I was writing it before the primaries started. But, if you look at the exit polling data from the primaries that were held, in particular before the epidemic happened, the numbers for, under 45 voters went for Bernie Sanders, like just by staggering margins.
Right.
And Joe Biden has had almost no support, like, single digit support from anybody under the age of 30. And so that's a real generational shift coming for the Democratic Party too. And it's something that the party leadership really, I don't think is reckoned with or really cared about in terms of appealing to those young people. But that's also very real. I mean, the economic attitudes of voters under 40, the cultural attitudes of voters under 40 are much more in line with like AOC than they are with Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah.
And as those voters start to show up, their numbers.
Yeah.
One thing that we know very clearly from decades of data is that you're more likely to turn out to vote as you get older. Right? And so as these young leftists start turning out to vote rather than just sort of answering a poll, they are going to inevitably transform the Democratic Party, whether the Democratic Party wants it or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a really also another sort of really exciting nugget in the data that we're looking at, is that cohort of really left sort of democratic socialist voters is coming for us.
Right. And no, I mean, and to be quite honest with you, if you look at the lay of the land, like we need it, we need them now, right? We need those voters We need those voters now. And I think the political landscape is changing dramatically right in front of us because of COVID-19, because of the response or the lack of response from either party in regards to like taking care of just the general population, like we see in other nations. We see the Republicans who are basically saying, go back out and work and make us our money, even if it costs us a couple of million lives. And then you have the Democrats who I covered it yesterday on yesterday's show, who are nitpicking people who may be getting unemployment and the stimulus check. Like they want to make sure that people don't double dip. And so you have like this gross incompetence on both sides of the aisle. And the young generation, like they're growing up, like you and I, we grew up in, 9/11, the era of 9/11 and the recession. And this generation behind us, some of them might have been young enough to remember 9/11, maybe not, but this is their second recession and they're going into something that's even deeper, we're at depression levels. I think there is no other way to see the future, with the exception of other than through the lens of leftist style politics. But talk about the data in terms of the Republican Party, this appearance of young conservatives, Charlie Kirks of the world. They try to make a big move on college campuses and try to foment this movement, this conservative movement amongst young people. But you're saying that in your book, you're basically saying this is almost like the last hurrah for this style of conservatism, and Donald Trump kind of represents that final death pang almost of this style of conservatism.
Yeah, I mean, you could think of Trump as sort of like a last gasp of a dying majority, and I think that these sort of like these very prominent, very aggressive young sort of Trumpist Republicans on Twitter and on Fox News give people a false impression that they represent anyone in the generation, let alone Republicans in their generation, right? So if you look at voting trends and party ID trends, like whether you identify as a Democrat or Republican. The data is pretty clear. Today's 18 to 29-year-old, 15 to 20 points more Democratic in terms of the voting outcomes. We had one of the most lopsided sort of generational cohort outcomes in 2018.
David, I don't mean to cut you off, but your signal went bad on the data point. Could you back up about 2 or 3 sentences and give us that data again?
Sure. So if you look at the data about how voters under the age of 29 identify as Democrats or Republicans, Democrats have consistently led on that measure by 15 or 20 points for some time now. And on the flip side of that, if you look at young Republicans tend to disapprove of Donald Trump by double digits more than their older peers. Doesn't mean that they disapprove of him like in a majority sense, right? But you have a cohort like let's say for the sake of argument, it's 30 million people, right? Democrats are winning that cohort, almost 2 to 1, right? Let's say 60. And then in that 40% of Republicans who are young, who are under the age of 29, when you dig into the data, like if you look at the Harvard Youth Poll, for instance, they are much more likely to disapprove of Donald Trump than their older Republican peers. They have more socially liberal attitudes. They're more concerned about climate change. So even in that number of, even if that 40% of young people who are Republicans, a lot of them are gettable for Democrats because their underlying attitudes don't really reflect their current voting patterns. Maybe because their parents were both Republicans and they're still voting Republican, and that could change over the course of your 20s. But a big piece of the book is like your voting attitudes and your partisan identification are pretty much set by the time you're 25 or so, and it's very hard to dislodge that. In fact, it gets harder and harder as you get older to change someone's partisan identification. I think that also really flies in the face of the conventional wisdom, because I think we probably all know somebody that was a leftist when they were young, and then now they're like an old conservative, But that's anecdotes, right? Like that really doesn't show up in the data that we have.
Interesting.
How people's how people's identities change over time.
So what happens then? What happens with the Republican Party? A lot of people have been pronouncing death over the Republican Party for several election cycles. But you're saying like just on the raw data, if all things being equal, what happens to the Republican Party?
all things being equal, current trends hold. I think that we're going to have another, reasonably close election in the fall. But starting in 2024, the composition of the electorate, so the oldest members of the electorate will start dying off. This crisis, if in addition to its many horrors, it is really going to trim away at the sort of the percentage of Americans who are over the age of 75. And that's tragic, but it's going to continue. It's going to contribute to these trends. So starting in 2024, I think Republicans, all things being equal again, are likely to start losing national elections by, probably 5 points in 2024, 7 points in 2028, and sort of escalating from there until they start making inroads with incoming voters. That is like, if you're about to turn 18, who are you going to vote for?
Right.
And the political science is throughout the years has been pretty clear on this. Like your voting patterns when you turn 18 are influenced by your parents,
okay,
right? And they're influenced by the performance of the party in power when you turn 18, okay? And so so one of the great mysteries that I'm trying to answer in this book is like, up until the last couple of months, the economy was doing reasonably well. The country, at least on the surface level, was doing reasonably well, and yet these incoming 18-year-olds, 16 to 20-year-olds, are still rejecting the Republican Party, despite the fact that things were, prior to the COVID crisis, were going reasonably well. I think you dig into the data, of course, things were not really going that well, maybe for young people, but at least the perception should have been communicating to those incoming voters that, like, okay, the Republicans are in power, and the unemployment is low, so that should influence your choice, and it just hasn't done that. So people our age, Ben, like, we grew up with 9/11, and then we had the Iraq War, which is a huge policy disaster overseen by Republicans, and then we had the Great Recession, which was a policy disaster overseen by Republicans, right?
Right.
And so that it makes a lot of sense that that our generation, the millennials, I'm actually a sort of like a younger Gen Xer, but like younger Gen X to the millennials, we can explain a lot of those voting patterns because Republicans governed badly when those generations were young. So the mystery is like, why are these Zoomers leaning so far to the left? And political science doesn't have a great answer for that. I tried to offer one in the book, which is like, if you dig in again, you dig into the polling data, like, what do these young people believe? And it's like a really bad fit for the policy positions of the Republican Party. And instead of trying to like adjust them and change and try to appeal to these young people, and Generation Z is it's going to be the most diverse generation in American history. The next generation behind Generation Z, we already have data on them. They look even more to the left.
Yeah.
And so it's like, if I'm a Republican strategist, I look at these numbers and I'm like, wow, we got to change, or we're gonna go the way of the Whig Party in the 1850s. We might not survive this. So.
The rest of the interview is available to patrons, patreon.com/the BPD show, where we discuss the fact that the left is actually too far left for the Democratic Party, not just Republicans. But in the meantime, let's have this patron party. Let's go.
Go to www.patreon.com/the BPD show and support the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Here we go. Very special welcome and thank you to all of our newest patrons, without whom this show is entirely impossible. Very special welcome aboard to Michael Corley. Thank you for becoming a patron. Greg Shavers, thank you for becoming a patron. Helen Taylor, thank you for becoming a patron. Oh. Ashley Crease, thank you for becoming a patron. And last but not least, Michael Keith, thank you for becoming a patron. Everybody bop your head for a second. That's that DC go-go, baby. The DMV. Here we go. You too can become a part of this prestigious and prodigious patron party by going to patreon.com/the BPD show, where you get twice the content, uncut, unfiltered, unedited interviews, and none of the advertisements like you're going to get right about here.
Welcome back to the Benjamin Dixon Show. Visit us online at www.thebenjamindixonshow.com.
Welcome back. Okay, welcome back. So I want to jump in on the conversation that's happening around us about Ahmaud Arbery and the conversation that's going on in conservative circles as it pertains to Ahmaud Arbery being led and facilitated by none other than Queen Auntie Ruckus herself, Candace Owens, who is providing cover for conservatives and Republicans and all around white supremacists to discuss whether or not it was okay for these men to gun down this black man because he went onto a construction site, a site that was a house that was being built. Nothing there, no one there, nothing that could be stolen, even if he had stolen something. Candace Owens is suggesting that there's something far more nefarious going on. And what she is doing for money, as she always does, is to say the extreme thing the most extreme thing that she could possibly say to continue garnering attention, which works. That's the culture that we live in. Someone says something that is obscene, something that is racist, and even if she is a black, I don't care how black she is. Right? It doesn't matter. We have a long track record of black people doing the bidding of white supremacy. And right now, Candace Owens is front and center in this conversation about whether or not it was okay for conservatives for these three men. One of the men who has not been arrested yet, but he was the one filming it. He had his gun ready to go as well. So I'm sure somewhere along the line he's going to get arrested too. But she is facilitating, Candace Owens is facilitating the conversation, or providing cover rather, for the conservative ecosystem to engage in this conversation about when it's appropriate to kill black men. The conversation that we're having is, when is it going to be appropriate for us to shoot back, and what guns will we use? Period. This is where we are, right? If the conversation, if the discussion is going to be about whether or not it is okay for them to make a snap judgment call on our lives, then you damn well better believe we're going to make the same judgment call on yours. Because if it's a competition, like I said yesterday on yesterday's episode, if it's a competition about whether or not who's going to get home to their kids because of their predisposition in the minds of white Americans, particularly white conservative men, and those who think that they are white, like George Zimmerman, in their minds, they feel it necessary to take it upon themselves to be the arbiters of their own twisted Jim Crow justice. We have come to a loggerheads. We're come to an impasse where they are trying to make a decision about whether or not they should shoot us. You goddamn better well believe we're going to shoot them first. We have to. We absolutely, in what circumstance are we supposed to sit there and allow them to make judgment on our lives, and we sit there and do nothing? Who do you think we are? What do you think? We're just mindless automatons, sheep to the slaughter? They are literally having conversations right now. Millions of people being headed up by the Queen, Uncle Ruckus, Auntie Ruckus. Candace Owens is facilitating this conversation on Twitter with her 2.2 million followers, and conservative media personalities are getting in on the conversation, and they're trying to discuss the nuances of when it was okay for these men to shoot Ahmaud Arbery, though they had no authority to do so. And even then, we challenged the authority of the police to do so. That's a whole different conversation we'll get to in a minute. But they're talking about vigilante justice, which it wasn't even justice because he hadn't committed a crime. I want you to understand they're having a conversation of when is it casually okay to kill black men. And what are we supposed to do? Just sit here and be like, well, let us know what you come up with when you decide, well, so we can abide by your parameters. Absolutely the not. Who the hell do you think we are? What do you think we are? You're like if we are human beings, then we have every right to defend ourselves against this, against the insidiousness of people who are sitting around as though we have no autonomy, we have no self-determination. All we can do is sit around and allow them to give commentary on when it's okay to kill a black man and not expect us to respond. Okay, you can try that shit if you want to. Try that shit, Candace Owens. You come out here and put your money where your mouth is, Candace, since you are the queen leader of this white supremacist. And I want to make something clear. I want to make something clear. The odds the stakes rather have never been higher. I want you to listen to this clip of what just happened this past week in North Carolina. And this is what happened with a police officer, with a deputy. I just want you to listen to this audio. About a lynch mob being headed up in 2020 by a deputy of the law, an officer of the law, not in Jim Crow 1920, but in the year of our Lord 2020. Listen to this.
Damien says he was playing video games Sunday night when he heard a loud knock on the door and opened it.
I see these guys in front of me, and they're holding guns, and it looks like there's one in a police uniform. And he's the one that speaks to me first. He says, we're looking for a missing girl. We were given this address, and we were given your name, and we were told that she's here. So we're going to enter.
The noise woke his mom, who jumped into action, pushing her son out of the door to the other side of the room, fearing he'd be hurt.
Coming to the door like that with a mob of people with guns, what do we expect? What were the intentions? Like, what if he was the person that they were looking for? Or what if I was not at home? What would have happened? I don't want to have that conversation. I don't want him to be a statistic.
Damien says he told the group they had the wrong guy and the girl wasn't there. His mom says her son repeated his own name, chanting it over and over until it clicked for the group that he wasn't the person they were looking for.
This story could have ended so many ways. What were they going to do if they had not believed him and insisted that he was the guy? Were they going to take him out into the streets? The police officer has been charged, has been fired and been charged in this, but that's almost too late, right? The damage could have already been done. Like, the emotional damage is done, but this boy could be dead. We're tired of getting quote unquote justice after the fact. It's not justice until these people are in jail. And a lot of times we get arrested, but we don't get convictions. But even with the conviction, we're tired of getting justice after the fact. We want to still be alive. And here we have in 2020, we have lynch mobs pounding on the door of a young black teenager. And this is the nature of America right now. Don't you think that these people who are running around here with their guns to go get Subway sandwiches, right? They're trying to make a statement, and so they carry their guns with them to go get sandwiches from Subway as they protest being brutalized or marginalized, rather, because they are asked to be quarantined. Don't you think these people who are just looking for an opportunity to express their perceived superiority, don't you think that they would take this to the next? I mean, hell, we saw them literally take it to the next level in Brunswick, Georgia, with Ahmaud Arbery. And the conversation that is being had around this all is whether or not it was justified to kill Ahmaud Arbery because he was on a construction site. And with this type of behavior going on around the country, you think for a second that it's inappropriate for us to discuss shooting back? Like, the stakes have risen. This is a totally different ball game. Totally different ball game. They are empowered. They are emboldened. They are emboldened by their president. They're emboldened by the system that always protects them no matter what. All they have to do is say that they feared for their lives and they're going to be just fine. Meanwhile, the people whose lives are always at risk, the people who should constantly fear for their lives, black men in particular, if we even discuss self-preservation, if we discuss protecting ourselves and our families, if we discuss self-defense, then we're labeled as extremists and radicals by this government. All right, folks, that's it for the public show. It's a lot going on. There's a lot going on. A lot of things to be upset about. And I got to cover all of those stories. It will come up after the music. Patrons, stay tuned. A lot of news and politics after the music. More interview and more discussions, difficult conversations. If you want access to that, go to patreon.com/the BPD show. Otherwise, I will see you tomorrow. Take care, everybody.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.patreon.com/the BPD show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.